Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of Severance Season 2, Episode 3, Who is Alive? Before I jump in my review, hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of Severance. I'm also going to be reviewing The White Lotus this season. So I'm going to break my review into two parts. We're going to start with everything that goes on inside of Lumon, which will also be broken down to different character arcs, and then we'll go to everything that goes on outside of Lumon this episode. So what is interesting about inside Lumon, we're kind of getting to see the story direction for our four main characters inside of Lumon, where we see Mark is printing out these missing posters for Miss Casey, and you see that in response to this and Mark asking for help to put these around in different departments, that Dylan's foot is completely off the gas here. Dylan is someone who is easily swayed by perks, and like we saw set up with Milch earlier, he's about to get the biggest perk of all, to be able to see his Outie's family. Mark's idea about giving out these banners is if they don't know we're doing it, how can they punish us? Because, like Lumon has said now that they've let them roam free without being watched. And at least they have some leverage if they do get caught, that they can catch Lumon in their own lie. Now, if you've seen my previous reviews, I'm going back and forth about if this is really Helly or Helena. And this episode now really made me go to the other side again, or now I'm back thinking it's Helena. First, how she kind of awkwardly comforts Irv and is talking about him going back to O&D. It's the first time, and she's like, "We got you." But Dylan makes a very weird face at this, like it was a weird moment in general from Helly. And what really stands out, her feeling like Helena the most this episode, was when she had this awkward moment with Mark where it seemed like they were about to kiss, but the Helly we know would have made a sarcastic joke about how awkward the moment is, not just stand there like someone who's just very not emotionally intelligent in that moment. What I also thought was interesting is when Mark explains his plan to Helly, and he's saying that he wants to get Miss Casey to the outer stairwell and then leave the rest to Outie Mark. This is great that this was reflected on the Outie Mark this episode, because when Ragabi will ask him about what his plan is, even if it worked with having that message through his eyes, what was any Mark going to do getting the message back? He's like, well, I don't know. I'll leave that to any Mark. So it's funny that they still have to get better at working together, these two versions of Mark, that they're leaving too much weight on the other Mark. That's one of those funny situations that only this show could be able to do. Now, interestingly enough, Irv tells Dylan he has been drawing his Outie's painting, which has been set up that this is going to be a storyline where Irv is going to run with that. He's only told Dylan about it so far, and he's like, we can look for it, Dylan. We can look today. But the problem is, Dylan being his partner in this, it's not going to happen right now because, like I said, Dylan's foot is off the gas. He's trying to be loyal right now so he gets to see his Outie's family. So you'll see when we get to Irv's story, they shift Felicia into that role, about finding in that painting that hallway. But you see, Dylan is directly rewarded for him avoiding these temptations. Miss Wong sees this and asks him to come with her. So we'll hit on what happens with Dylan in a second. But let's first start, when we're talking about focusing on one character, let's start with Milch first. He is greeted by Natalie in his office with the board on the phone. The actress of Natalie was incredible in the scene for many reasons. One of them being her able to show different lines where she's saying one thing, but little in there you see in her eyes a sadness. That starts here when she says the line, "The board wants you to feel connected to Lumon's history." Right before she says it and she's hearing them and knows what they're going to set him up for because she's been through this, you see that sadness. Milch will see the black Kier art. And then she says, "The board wishes to express that I, Natalie, received the same gift upon receipt of my current position and found it extremely moving." And then when she says this, again, there's a sadness there that she's slipping in and out of. And when Milchek is responding to this, he says he's grateful, but he's absolutely hurt by this. And she says board has concluded the call before he's even able to finish what he's trying to say. He looks into Natalie's eyes. She slips a little that she's broken too. There's a connection there, both going through this same experience. Now, what I thought was interesting was in the after show for Severance, the podcast that Ben Stiller and Adam Scott do, when they had Tremel Tillman on, who plays Milchek, he had talked about how on set he had talked with Ben Stiller about the race part of Milchek and wondering and exploring his situation where he's surrounded by mostly white people around him and how that affects his character. So you see they're leaning into that story this season. And what I thought was really fascinating was when he puts that Kier imagery back in the box later on, he's trying to store it away on the top shelf because he doesn't want to see it. But it's so visually important that it's kind of hanging and not fully going back there because it's always hanging in the back of his mind too. This is something he's not going to be able to just ignore and push away. So with Milchik and with Kobelvig, they are really setting them up to have some sort of redemption arc somewhere down the road and being more gray characters, which I like, and really setting up Helena and all of the higher-ups at Lumon to be the bigger bads at this point. I also want to mention, with Milchik on his computer, we see a management control panel he's working on. You see the 4 IDs, so I'm assuming that's our 4 main characters. And then it shows him controlling surveillance. And you see most of them are off, but there's 2 on, and he turns 1 off, which I'm assuming was where Dylan was in the room for the Outie visitation. So it's interesting to see, yes, there is still a big one on as well. And there's some sort of surveillance, obviously, at their hands at any time. Now, let's go to Helly and Mark. Helly and Mark go to the goat room they originally found. And we're figuring out now that those baby goats start there in that room, and then there's a hallway where they go. And this hallway has goat poo in it, which was really funny. But it's leading to an even bigger goat room, which is like a goat farm when they get bigger. What freaked me out was the man dressed as the black goat. But we see and are revealed who the character is that Gwendolyn Christie is playing. We don't know her name yet, but the name of their department is the Mammalians Nurturable, which is basically like goat wranglers, we'll call them. So now we're getting to weird territory of the show. So they show the missing poster, Miss Casey. And Mark says to her, this is our former wellness director. And Mark can easily sense she knows who he's talking about. So he pushes her on it, but then she shakes the cowbell, or called goat bell, and the goat people come out. And that's where it gets even more weird. And you see how protective she is of her department. It reminds you of when they met O&D and how protective they were and the tensions that are built between these departments. And it's all based on nasty rumors. It's why they want to see their bellies and see pouches. And she says, see, they're pouchless. And her sidekick's like, it proves nothing, which reminds me of Dylan's type of behavior towards this. But Bert talked about a rumor that MDRs had larvae in their pouches, which will one day kill and replace the individual. So that is the rumor they have definitely heard in this department about the MDRs. But it's weird thinking about it because that larva symbolically and replacing the individual can represent what they're doing on that computer and what Mark, it seems like he's doing with producing something in Miss Casey. So it's really cool and fascinating how this all kind of works and how Lumon pins these departments against each other to really prevent them working together. That's been something happening in the show since day 1. But Mark wins over the overprotective Gwendolyn, and she admits Miss Casey did wellness sessions there and that she won't get in the way, basically, of his search, which I think is interesting. And it's interesting to kind of ponder, are they severed, these people? Are they just crazy? I don't know. And there's something off about all of them. So really want to hear your theories about the goat room and the goat people. But I really think at the end of the day, those goats are like mice you'd see in other sci-fi shows where they're the testing subject and what they're going to do with actual people at Lumon. Now let's go to Irv. Irv goes back in O&D. He brings the poster over of Miss Casey. But it's interesting that the painting of Keir meeting his love, the one that he talked with Britt about, that showed that Keir had met his love at work. And this opened the door for Britt and Irv that they could see that as okay to date at work. Is it just a coincidence that that's there on display when Irv arrives, which is very strange. So I do think someone is obviously still keeping an eye on them some way, somehow, and planting that there. But Felicia and Irv bond over Annie Burt, kind of like you would about someone who just passed away that you both loved, which is like when an Annie retires. And you see that Felicia's like freaked out about even seeing the Miss Casey poster. Like, no, I don't want to see her. If I see her, she probably has to say something. So that's also interesting too. But he actually wanted to show her the Burt sketches, which actually turn into the hallway his Outie has been painting. She informs him it is the exports hall. This is the hall we saw Miss Casey go down. She says we send a lot of shipments there. So I think they might not know what's in those shipments, but we can put the dots together, the audience, that these are people like Miss Casey, and that they probably changed and had a guy do it now because someone at O&D eventually slipped up about what they were actually moving and found out. But it's big she knows where it is what they're basically alluding here. So that's going to be a big story of her and Irv going and finding this hallway and how much Dylan might get in the way now of the progress this team has made because he is getting roped in by these perks. So speaking of Dylan, you see him walking with Miss Wong when she's taking him to his big perk. And I like he asked, rude to keep asking why you're a kid. Are you okay? They aren't forcing you to be here, are they? Who knows, right? Maybe they are. But we see the security room was turned into the Outie visitation room. This is like the old break room turned into a new break room with the TV we saw in episode 1. It's also suspicious that there's only one picture of Dylan and Gretchen on the wall, but there's only that cowboy picture we see because they don't want any information from background of where he lives really getting into his head. They want the safest pictures possible and they don't want to do multiple. But it's an 18-minute Outie visitation event. The music, the vibe feels like a wellness check, but they made Gretchen put her stuff in a transparent sack. So that's obviously for security reasons so they could see what she's bringing in there. But it's interesting, she slips and says, Seth said this might be weird talking about Milchek. But remember, in MDR, they don't know his first name is Seth. They just know him as Mr. Milchek. And that's when Miss Wong has to come in, confirming she's watching them, and is like, please refrain from sharing information that might be privileged or sensitive. And even when she asks, like, that's a kid there, she says Miss Wong and corrects her. So she even hears the whispering. So it's that fine line where I think Lumon's doing right now, where there's some areas, yes, they aren't spying, but areas that could be a little more dangerous, like having an Outie talk to an innie, of course they're going to be watching. Now, I love Merritt Weaver, who plays Gretchen. You might remember her from Walking Dead. But she informs Dylan he has 3 kids and has trouble keeping jobs, which we obviously got a hint at seeing him doing an interview at a door factory. And I love Dylan's reaction. He's like, is he dumb? Is he a dick? And she's like, nothing's wrong with him. He never quite found his thing. So that's where it seems like Dylan just eventually caved into maybe even an idea from Gretchen that to try this severed program. And he says, I'm going to make you all proud. And she's like, I'm always proud of you, Dylan. She tells him she loves him. And you see his face light up, but that's going to be big too, because you wonder how that is going to probably blend into any Dylan's feelings there that he can touch upon Outie Dylan's love for her. And the dangers Lumon might have by even having her around the innie Dylan. What I thought was really fascinating though is when we see inside of his house. Remember, he is like Mark, where he lives on something that is a Lumon property, and it's interesting because Gretchen lives there with him, unlike Mark, where like Mark, it would be weird if he lived with Devin anyway, but no one's living with Mark in his place on Lumon property. So it makes you wonder about Gretchen. It makes you wonder if she's just a believer in Kier, if she's severed herself in some ways. I don't know. It's really fascinating. What's really fascinating too, because it's on Lumon property, you see one of the kids is watching a cartoon, which is definitely a Lumon cartoon, and you see the characters kidnap somebody, which these are really dogs in the cartoon, but we'll, just for sake of talking, it's just this person, and they x-ray that person, examining a chip in the dog's head, which is just like Severance. And even at the end, they show, it looks like the intro card where Adam Scott's flying through a bottle. It looks like that with this rocket flying through. You could even look at it as like brain cells. And there's even a Kier doll on the floor, which I loved. So in that area, when you're raising a family, we're really seeing our first really Lumon family there and what they have around them. It's all Kier propaganda. And you see he asked Gretchen, how was the thing? She's like, good. But it was weird good, but good. And we also see Gretchen works overnight. That's how this works, right? Because Dylan's not home during the day. He's in his severed state. So it'd be interesting to see, too, where Gretchen works and how much she knows. So now let's jump to everything going on outside of Lumon. So this episode, I really liked. It opened the door more and more in the world building of like Lumon not just being that building, Lumon being that area and where Mark lives and what they are seeing, that family of Dylan. So I really find that fascinating. I feel like we're going to get more and more into that as the episodes go on. Now, outside Lumon, we see Kobelvik slept in her car, and that car is fully equipped with a cassette player. She puts a cassette in. She drives to Salt's Neck, which is this fictional city, but it's very strange because when she gets that sign, there's this huge house out in the open. Only one. She wasn't even going to it. It's just weird that they showed that house there. I wonder what that is. But she looks at her mother, Charlotte's breathing tube in the passenger seat, which has this huge significance. And to me, she looks at it and then turns around. So I feel like she was going away from getting rid of all this from Lumon, but there's something about Charlotte, that tube, her beliefs in Kier, that made her turn around and go back to Lumon. I like the idea that there's something happened with her mom that Lumon messed up on, and that's the reason she got such a high job, and that also why she threatens that they can't really get rid of her. They have to have her around because she knows too much. Which also explains why I believe whatever happened with her mom is why she's so spooked by Helly and her bodyguard when they're asking her to go talk to the board again. Like something would actually seriously happen to her by them. So I thought that was really interesting too. But speaking of that scene, she was waiting outside for Helena to come out. She's telling Helena she wants to finish the work she started, Cold Harbor with Mark S. That is her baby, that project. And people say she's obsessed with Mark S, but there's also a part of it where it's like she's also obsessed with, like she's saying, industry and her job, and that's what she's doing in her eyes for Kier, and this is her project, and she wants to finish it, clearly. And I love she says she wants Milch out, and he's not equipped for the task. So I love they're pinning those two against each other, and like how he blames everything on her. And I love Helena's response. She says, I hear ego, hubris, arrogance. Kier teaches us they only cause pain. So it's a classic case of using, you could say religion, cult, whatever, using slogans to get out of certain situations and manipulate people. But she stabs back at her and is like, everything I accomplished, I earned through dedication and industry, not because I was born into it. So she gets a Nepo baby dig on Helena. And Helena says, I think you overestimated your contributions and underestimated your blessings. So I love the tension and nasty things they're saying to each other in a more classier way. And I love she says, we didn't have to ask you back. And Cobell says back, you didn't have a choice. So again, just more about Cobell that she has on them. And that's why I think there might have been a case here where Helena was planning to actually have her taken care of if she went up with them. And Cobell knew that, because that's another option they could have. Instead of having her running around out there or having to have her work for her, they could just get rid of her. So I thought that was really chilling. Now we'll go back with Natalie, who's having a big episode and really, really interesting character. But her with Rickon, and you see how quickly Rickon's ready to sell his soul already to this big corporation that he's talked about in a bad way, and about them wanting a version of the UUR for the innies, and that they would tweak it here and there that speaks better to innies, where again they would manipulate it. But it seems like Lumon sees that there's something that worked with the innies in that book, and they want to turn it to their way. And you see Devin right away and sees this is a red flag and not digging this whole situation. So I feel like this just shows more that now Rickon can be a serious issue here, and that Lumon can use Rickon against the Outies we're rooting for. Now, we see the opening episode, Outie Mark, timing how long it would take him running from his parking spot into the office. He's timing it on his watch, but he has to take that watch off when he checks in, which I thought was interesting. So he still has to count going into the elevator. It's 2 minutes, 18 seconds. So later with Devin, the Outie, will talk about this. He wants to see the image of who was alive for his innie, because he's just responding to him saying she's alive at the party, and that image he would be burning into his retinas. Now, later on, we see him really leaning into doing this with the blanket, and he's trying to burn it to his retinas. Ragabi shows up. Now, I love this show. It's my favorite show, but I will say I tried so many ways in my head. Maybe I'm missing something, but where the hell did Ragabi come from? How did she know he was right there at this abandoned shack where he's practicing this? I thought that was really strange, or we missed a scene where maybe he set up meeting her there. Really weird. Really not like this show to have something that like out of nowhere. So I wasn't crazy about that. But she tells him all the reasons it wouldn't work, and how would any Mark send a message back like I brought up before. She said there's an easier way. It's like leading to why we had the storyline with Petey, and she spills the beans also that his wife is alive at Lumon, and that she couldn't tell him this when she first met because of the situation they were in, which was insane, where she ended up having to kill that security guard from Lumon. But you see, she suggests reintegration is the only way, and at his emotional state of learning his wife is confirmed to still have been seen alive at Lumon, he's like, yes to reintegration, I want to see my wife. Brilliant acting by Adam Scott, this whole scene. And I love how they let it sit when he's getting this information from Ragabi during this scene. So good directing there by Ben Stiller. And I think his best directing was in this scene, and really awesome scene of reintegration happening to Mark. The editing was great here too, and his handshaking was so eerie. I love how they did the questions. It just had your heart pumping, and him blending his memories of himself with his innie Mark memories, and him being on that table and Petey greeting him. Really, really cool ending, really exciting, and a really big bomb to happen in the show, which it needed at this point. I think it needed a big drop now, because we're at the end of episode 3, and this is it. Now just not being innie Mark to Outie Mark to innie Mark. Now it's like, oh my God, a reintegrated Mark? That's just like a game changer, and could be an earthquake for the show. So I'm really excited to see how they're going to do this. Like, I cannot wait till the next episode. And the next episode is the one people who saw it early are all saying is like the really amazing episode. So I'm really excited. I hope I'm not overhyping it for you guys, but I haven't seen it yet. I'm excited to watch it. But this was a really good episode, like episode 2. I'm going to give this one, though, a little lower than episode 2, but better than episode 1. So I'm going to give it just a 9. Solid, really good stuff, interesting stuff. And I'm really enjoying the season like I did season 1. I'm excited. We got a lot of answers still here, and still mysteries brewing that are very interesting. And I really like what's going on with everyone inside too, and how they're doing their storylines, especially with Dylan meeting Gretchen was really cool, and what's going to happen with Irving and Felicia. So let me know your thoughts down below. I love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button, share the video. I need any help I can get. It helps in so many ways you have no idea. I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you next time.